Okay, so the summer series we're doing now, we're going back to Genesis, but we're going to be looking at it a way that even in this group, we never quite looked at it the same. Because when we did Genesis 5 years ago, most of the group had just really gotten started in learning to read Hebrew. And so we just highlighted a few words, a little bit of grammar. Now, and over time, in the last 5 years, we've developed into a much more looking intensely at the Torah text, what the Hebrew says, what the Hebrew doesn't say, some of the ambiguity of the language, that therefore translation is commentary. We've looked at the form criticism, the dividing between the different communities that made up the old Israelite full Torah society, who wrote the Torah, when they wrote the Torah, where some of these mythologies and legends and stories came from. We've been doing all that. We're now going to go back and do that in Genesis from this summer, the creation stories and the flood stories, where there are parallel stories and where there are no parallel stories, and what that says about it all. We've also spent some time, and in the future we'll spend more time on what do we do with all of this information? What do we do with knowing about the roots of the different groups within Israel at that time? What do we do for today? How can it perhaps inform us? And from my vantage point, what was the genius of the editor redactor in putting these diverse stories together that were often sometimes in conflict with each other and unifying them into an apparently totally unified and common history. So that's where we're going. The way that we're going to be doing it during the summer is two different, and sometimes more than two different kinds of material will be posted on the website. One will be called Read for Reading Fluency. And this is the material that you'll be practicing for Hebrew reading fluency, because that was part of creating this group, was people whose Hebrew reading fluency is not as high as they would like it to be, which probably should be about everybody. We can all get better in our fluency, but also material that can give us a sense of Hebrew vocabulary, Hebrew grammar, before we actually look at the real commentary translation of the text. For that purpose, therefore, I've tried to keep it to what we've done in the past, and that is your reading fluency material is one page like this of our fairly large type font and type size, so that it's not too much material to read. In the past, you've read right straight across, but now, because we're combining the two stories, the reading fluency is actually going to be done in a slightly different way. I would recommend reading all of one side, which in this case might be the EP pre-creation, which is only actually a little under 6 verses, and practice reading that for fluency. Then read the Y pre-creation story, which will be again about 5 or 6 verses. So it'll be 10 or 11 verses that we'll be reading for practice, so that you'd be practicing reading Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, v'haaretz hayata tohu vavohu, and reading all the way down, and then go over and practice reading Ela toldot hashamayim v'haaretz v'hibar am biyom asot Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. And in the reading fluency part, you'll notice at various points there are ellipses. The ellipses is material that is not germane to our later discussion. And so therefore, if you want to actually read the whole thing, you can then go to a different thing in the material where you get all of this, which is quite a bit more to practice reading in 1 week. So when we switch to the discussion, we'll be looking more at the English than we will be looking at the Hebrew, and only referring back to the Hebrew when we want to highlight some specific word or some strange construction. So we'll be doing that, looking at that material for the first 10 or 15 minutes from 10:45 to about 11, going over some things for you to think about. And then at 11 o'clock, we will be doing breakout rooms so that you can practice doing the reading with each other. And then after that, we'll come back and at 11:15 actually explore the text. For those who are watching this recording and don't have the Hebrew fluency and at this point are not ready to even join a breakout room, they can join in, you all can join in at 11:15 for the discussion, because the discussion will be similar to what we do on Torah study at TBZ on Saturday mornings, where we look at the text and Hebrew reading fluency is not required. Those who have it sometimes add a little something for people to think about, but the Saturday morning Hebrew, the Torah study is not Hebrew based. Our 11:15 Torah study, therefore, in comparing the two stories, we can do that as easily in English from the comparison standpoint, and the other area that we'll be looking at as we compare the stories is who probably wrote or told these stories. Where did these stories come from? And when we come back at 11:15, I will give you my theory on where these two sets of stories came from. What were the disparate communities that would have told and resonated with these stories? So once again, in your breakout rooms, all you'll be focusing on is the one that is captioned as reading fluency practice, and it will be the one that has this one page of fairly large type, easy font Hebrew. And it will be from verse 1, Bereshit bara Elohim, down through the end of verse 6, which is Vayomer Elohim Yehi Rakia Betoch Hamayim Vehi Mavdil Ben Mayim Lamayim, and that will be the end of your reading practice, which, by the way, actually is going to be discussed. The English translation of that particular verse will be discussed next week, but it made good reading practice. And then you'll read together Ela Toldot Hashamayim, chapter 2, verse 4, and you'll read down to Hachayim Batoch Hagan Ve'etz Hada'at Tov V'Ra, and that will be the end of that reading. So any questions on your current next task before I send you off to breakout rooms and pause the recording? Okay, so here we go on the opening story of creation. First thing to know is that the Roman numerals, the large Roman numerals that I have, are my way of showing you what are the 6 steps of creation. So you notice both stories start with a pre-creation condition, and then only after that move into step 1. So what we're going to be comparing is the 6 steps of the EP story versus the 6 steps of the Y story. And this is the mythology that the EP authors adopted and adapted to their ultimate view of their biblical society, often viewed as the Northern Kingdom, and the Y or J in the classical way of looking at it is the mythology that they adopted and adapted for their Southern Kingdom generally. But I posit that the EP creation mythology that they used was actually a coastal mythology, one of people who lived on a seacoast, as opposed to the Y creation story, which would have been the people who lived in an inland area. Whether or not river people would have ascribed to one or the other in the ancient Near East, in the Mesopotamian, etc., Fertile Crescent area, is not our thought at this time, because the people of the Israelite Canaan world didn't have rivers like the Tigris, Euphrates, Niles, and so therefore their only river would have been the Jordan, and that would not have was not a major river of civilization. Basically, the people of the inland of the Negev and the central Israelite world were either farmers or shepherds, and the people on the coast would have then interacted in a seafaring kind of way or a seacoast kind of way. So we're not going to get into too much into the surrounding mythologies, but there is a lot of discussion on the surrounding mythologies.
Where are the Roman numerals on the EP
Yeah, both
pre-creation?
of the sets of Roman numerals delineate what I consider to be a step of creation.
No, where are they? I only see them in the English.
That's it, that's where they are.
Ah,
They're not in the Hebrew
all right.
because our focus and analysis is going to be from the English page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I
I
just
can
put them
add
into
those.
the English, not into the Hebrew. The
Okay.
Hebrew, if you want to find them, you just have to find the parallel verses.
That's what I'm doing.
So there's a lot to do to unpack from these creation stories that we're not going to do, starting with the very first word.
But that's the best.
The very
I
first
can add it.
word, Bereshit, in the EP story is the precursor to pages and pages of commentary and Agadot. In fact, there are several midrash written about the first letter of the first word.
Wow.
We're not going to deal with that, but you're welcome to go explore. Nowadays, fortunately, Google has pretty much everything from somebody, some of which is actually accurate. In any case, what we're going to be looking at is the larger picture. The idea is that creation in the biblical text is a process of moving from total chaos to ultimate order by divine will with a divinity that is interested in creating order for people. Ultimately, the ultimate creation will be some aspect of peoplehood because it's people who are telling the stories. Probably if those are telling the story, then they're the end of creation. But in this, we're going to be dealing from the standpoint of a human in the society that is telling these stories, or is hearing, or is relating to these stories. In both cases, the EP think coastal, and I'll go further into why that is. The Y think inland. Probably, I believe, better than thinking Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom. Although ultimately we'll be looking at the EP story, which is also the Ephraim story, which is the Northern Kingdom, and the Y story, which is the Yehuda, the Judah story, which is the Southern Kingdom. But from the standpoint of their mythology, it's not tribal, but rather social and geographic. So the ultimate aspect of chaos in the EP story is the creating of the heavens, the earth out of, and again, chaos and bedlam, and then capital C, chaotic. The reason I chose that, just by way of noting, in the Hebrew, the earth is at this point up here, tohu vavohu. And then later, we're going to have the statement of tahom. And tahom, you'll notice, is basically the same word as the tohu. Tohu vavohu has been used to parallel other kinds of ancient Near Eastern stories where there's an entity called Tiamat, which sounds a lot like Tohu and Tahom. But from our standpoint, tohu and vohu are a matching set of some form of total chaos. In most translations, it's something along the lines of unformed and void. From the standpoint of the never-ending story movie, it would be nothingness. So whatever is nothing, from the standpoint of a modern physicist, it's probably the point prior to the Big Bang, or the first millisecond or nanosecond of the Big Bang, when all the quarks are in total chaos with each other. And there are no atoms, there's no photons, there's nothing. Whatever it
That
is,
would be order.
that's already some form of order, exactly. So that's why I say this is the point prior to the Big Bang, when all potential is there and nothing has any recognizable order.
But the imagery is very strong, at least for me when I was reading the English. And I know it's supposed to be nothing, but I kept thinking about like an ultrasound, you know how to the untrained eye, an
Yeah, it
ultrasound is
just looks
just
like a blob. Yeah.
yeah, you know there's something there, but it's just indeterminate, you know.
That's a nice
And here
word.
it's maybe platonic potential.
Oh, don't say that.
Here it is. But the important thing, I think, also is that total nothingness is in a pair, is a match set. It's not nothing, it's tohu and vohu. The human mind can't really encompass or comprehend absolute nothingness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We also can't encompass absolute infinity. So in the human mind, we're always looking for patterns, we're always looking for sets, and we always see things in paired opposites. There's no North Pole without a South Pole. There's no right without a left. There's no up without a down. So even in nothingness, there's no nothing without an opposing nothing.
Oh.
And so that's why often unformed and void are used. Personally, I just like chaos and bedlam because they also, for me, evoke images of there is no way to impose a sense of order on whatever it is. However, in the midst of all this absolute nothing, there is already something. In fact, there are three somethings. Because we're told immediately after the earth is tohu and vohu, we're told there's choshech, darkness,
Mm-hmm.
there's ruach, wind or spirit, and there's mayim or water. So the absolute chaos is a chaos in the midst of wind, water, and darkness. Having gone to a sailing camp for 7 years on Cape Cod, the worst possible thing a sailor can imagine is being out in the middle of the ocean at night in a hurricane or some kind of storm. All there is darkness, water, and wind, all mixed together with each other. There's no sense of forward or backward, up or down. There's only a sense of being surrounded by absolute chaos of wind, water, and darkness. So the EP story, or the coastal mythology story, would then be attempting to impose some form of order into this storm at night in the middle of the water. And maybe, hopefully, at least you have a boat. But in this particular case, you don't even have a boat. It's just you in the middle of all of this, or it's the imagination that the divine, the deity, the God, the E, is sitting there or floating there or somehow ensconced there in the middle of this darkness, water, and wind. And the wind is actually Ruach Elohim. It's the spirit of the E, or the breath or the wind. So even the E would be apparently unformed and void, would be in the midst of would be part of the chaos, but the E is the divine, the Elohim, the God, as it were, is the only entity within this darkness, water, is the wind. So trying to evoke some kind of image to a people who are used to being out in boats. There will be then ultimately 6 Roman numerals of, well, if at least there were this, that would be a little bit of imposing of order on this chaos. And then number 2 would be, and now at least we get this. And then 3 would be, and this, and ultimately 6 would be, whew. Now there is total something where there used to be total nothing. And there used to be chaotic nothing. So we'll be looking at it from the standpoint of our ancient mariner before there's even a rhyme. Our seafaring biblical or pre-biblical people or person.
In the Hebrew at 6, what's the ellipsis that a word doesn't fit on the line?
The ellipsis is actually what I've left out in verse 7 rather, is the end of verse 8. The ellipsis in the Hebrew is Vayhi Erev Vayhi Voker Yom Echad. Or actually, there's Yom Sheni. I did put that into the end of verse 1, but the 6 steps are the 6 so-called days of creation. However, we're following a different paradigm because each of the 6 steps is actually going to be concluding with the word ki tov.
Yeah, that I remember.
So, and you'll notice I left out in the English translation the verse, yes, verse 5. In the English translation, I left out the end of verse 5, because that's the translation, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1. The reason I left that out of the English is because I don't want you to think about 6 days of creation. I want you to think about 6 steps of creation. The 6 days of creation are day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. The 6 steps of creation are for good, for good, for good, for good, for good, for good, 6 times. And what happens is in day 2 of creation, there are no goods. In day 3 of creation, there are 2 goods. So we're going to be looking at it from the standpoint again of our coastal person, who would not be measuring it by day necessarily, which is what the later author does, but would be measuring it by each step that's a little bit better for them in their storm-tossed boat. We're also going to be looking at what does the word good, Hebrew tov, actually mean. So that will be down the road as we have a few more of them sensing. So just by comparison, the Y pre-creation material starts with a story of the creation of the heavens and the earth in the day that it was done. And verse 5 is, there are no plants, there's no grass, there's no water, there's not even a dew on the ground, and there are no people. So we are in the middle of barren, totally unfertile, and unpopulated desert, which for the shepherd or for the farmer would most likely be their vision of the absolute worst case scenario. And so that's why I posit that this is a story of an inland people, a people who are tied to land and water and irrigation and either natural vegetation on which they can graze or induced vegetation which they can cultivate and become farmers.
Why is this not a more common understanding?
I would say partially because chapter 1 has this nice, neat 6-day package delineated. And so therefore the focus is on the 6 days of creation and analyzing the 6 days and the
Yeah, but what
questions
do you?
around it, as well as just translation issues. And with the chapter 2 story, it is not actually divided up. There's no pattern imposed by the biblical author on, it's simply a continuing narrative. But as I thought about the 6 steps rather than the 6 days in one, I wondered if the biblical author of 2, the biblical audience, and the mythologists of 2 did not also have in their minds some sense of gradual order placed on the chaos. But they did it by telling a narrative, and therefore they moved from step to step through the narrative without letting us know that they've moved from one step to the other. Other than that, I don't know why nobody else has written on this, but I haven't seen it anywhere. It doesn't actually mean that nobody's written on it. The other reason possibly is because much of modern biblical criticism is imbued in comparing it to local mythologies of the surrounding cultures.
Oh, that's interesting.
And none of the surrounding cultures lived in such a dichotomous world as the biblical author, editor, redactor did. In any case, for the first step then, on the EP, Roman numeral 1, chapter 1, verse 3, darkness, I'm out at night in my boat, no up, no down, no right, no left, nothing to see but water, wind swirling around me in the darkness. At least if I can see something, wouldn't that be nice? And so now there is a light, but the light is behind the clouds, beyond the clouds. The light is, if you think again about being out in a storm anywhere, and there's light all around. There's no source of the light, but at least it's daytime. You have a sense it must be daytime because the clouds aren't as dark as they were when it was nighttime. So there's light, and the light is just mixed with the darkness. And the light appears, and it's again light, not a source of light. The addendum to that, and so that ends in verse 4 with Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. And that's going to be our pattern. Vayar Elohim, God sees, and whatever it is that it's happened, God sees, ki tov, for good. The light is now present. And the creation of this light in the midst of the darkness, intertwined and totally enmeshed with the darkness, is the light is done. The addendum part is the light and the darkness should at least not coexist. So let's have a light period and a dark period, and let the lights alternate. Again, the idea that people need some kind of dichotomy. See, people need a paired opposite, day and night, light and dark, separated from each other, but totally involved and dependent upon each other. And so God says to the light, when it's light out, I'm going to call it day. And when it's dark out, I'm going to call it night. And then we get further confusion of the language because the light, when you see light, it's day, it's yom. When you see darkness, choshech, it's going to be called Lila. And then we get Vayhi Erev Vayhi Voker, we get the evening and morning, neither of which has been named up till this point. And we get Yom Echad, we get Yom used in a different context rather than the time of lightness. Now, Yom becomes the alternating time between the light and the dark. But that's further commentary we're not going to deal with. Right now, we're just focusing on step one for our seafarer. At least there's light out, and there's alternating periods of light and dark. On the Y story, step one, notice our field was total barren, unpopulated, no vegetation, desert. What's the first thing you want to do with the desert? Put water on it. So step one, which is verse 6, following immediately upon verse 5. So it sounds like it's just a flowing story, but if you divide it up, I think that we can see that, or I posit that there are steps. And so a mist goes up from the earth and irrigates all of the ground. Al pnei ha'adama, al pnei ha'aretz. And that, again, if you go back to the Hebrew, you'll see what it is. And that is a mist, an aid goes up from the water of Vihishka and waters irrigates the ground. So now it's no longer barren desert. Now at least it has water available. And it's a mist. So it's not even a flowing river or anything. It's just some form of water is on the ground. Over on that side, then, the next thing we need, now that there's water on the ground, is we need someone to, in fact, work the ground, create some vegetation. And in verse 7, it's the Adonai Elohim, the YE, creates an Adam, and it's it's a definite article word, Adam. Ha-Adam creates the Adam. So it can't be Adam because that would be a proper noun, not a common noun with a definite article. And the Adam comes from the Adamah. That's why I use the word groundling, because again, in the Hebrew, at that point, it says, Et ha'adam creates the Adam, afar, dust, min ha'adamah, and you'll notice that Adam is the root word of Adamah. The center part of the word Adamah, ground, is the word Adam, earthling, human, being, man, but it's actually a ground entity from the ground. So we have a human created, and the human is first fashioned out of dust, out of clay, and then this mannequin or statue, God gives the statue CPR and blows wind into its nose, puts the breath of life into it, and it's now a man, it's a person. And the person is given a garden. So now we have humans with plants to tend, but no definition of what those plants are. And the Hebrew actually says that the garden is actually east of Eden, whereas Eden, min ha Kedma, from the east. And again, you can go back to the Hebrew if you want and look at it. But our first step of creation is watering. Our next step of creation is the ability to actually cultivate and domesticate plants. For our mariner, back to step 2. Remember, there's light and dark, but there's still water, wind mixed together all around him. So let's have some clear air. And that's when God creates a rakia, and that's the Hebrew word rakia, creates a rakia in the middle of the waters. So the image I think that we're holding is there's some kind of bubble, air bubble, in the middle of the water, and we're in the middle of the air bubble. And the purpose of this rakia is to move the waters aside and use the rakia, this membrane, this air bubble, this firmament, this strengthening, this fermenting, this gelatizing, whatever it is, this boundary thing, so that water will be held up and water will be held down. And the water that's up will be now above it. It's going to be called shamayim, heavens or sky. And the water that's below it is going to be the oceans, the seas. Notice at this point, with the water above and the water below in verse 8, we don't have a kitov. This rakia thing has done its job, but the process of separating the waters, which was its job, is not done. So verse 8 is actually going to include conclude with the day 2, second day, which is the usual breaking point. If we consider the task to be...
I gotta go take a
yes.
train.
Yes.
Is this happily recorded?
Yes, this is all being, hopefully I remember to push the button.
Thank you. I'll see you when I see you. What's next week? We don't know.
Next week, we will be doing 629, which is steps 3 and 4. And it's the material in the materials that say 629. And we will be meeting.
Okay. And then I'm going to work for 5 Sundays in a row.
All right. They will all be recorded.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice to see you.
So if the job was to create the rakia, then it would have been kitov. I say that the job was not to create the rakia, but the job was to separate the waters. And so the first step of separating the waters is the air bubble, which is the end of day 2. Day 3 then is the waters continue to be separated out, the waters above and the waters below, and the waters below have to be further separated by creating a dryness in the midst of the waters, which is going to be called eretz, land. And then it says kitov. This is now the first half of actually day 3, but I would say is more clearly, if our separating of waters is the task, the separating of the waters is not done by simply separating water from above, water from water below. Again, from the standpoint of the seafarer, yeah, it's nice to have sky and water surface, but wouldn't it be nice if I could actually see some land? So it's only when the land is created and I now know that there's land, I'm not stuck out in the middle of the water, that I'm actually more ordered, more happy with my situation. And so the land and the water are created, heaven and earth, sky and oceans are created, and then land and seas are created. So we have step 2 is the full separation of waters into their ordered places. And the ordered places of waters would be sky, waters, and land areas holding the water back so that we're not in a world ocean. That's the end of step 2. Material that you'll be looking at for next week, for 629, then first has these readings. Again, ellipses are readings that are material that we aren't going to be looking at necessarily in our translations. And then when we come back together for it, you'll notice that step 3 in the Y story is followed by step 4, and we'll be looking at that. Step 3 in the E story, the EP story, now has a task for the land. And the land is going to be worked on with its own task. And then step 4 will be moving back to the heavens and finish working on the heavens. And then step 5 and 6 will be more work on the land, on the materials, which we'll get to in 2 weeks. But the reading fluency that you're going to be practicing again will be verse 8, Vayikra Elohim larakia shamayim, and then an end of the day. Vayomer Elohim yikavu hamayim mitachat hashamayim el makom echad vatera'eh hayabasha vayihichen vayikra Elohim layabasha eretz ulemikve hamayim kara yamim vayar Elohim kitov. And there's our bounding statement for the step. Then Vayomer Elohim Tadshe haaretz deshe esev mazria zera eitz pri oseh pri lemino asher zarovo al haaretz vayihichen. We'll be looking at these vayihichens as well, but they're not the bounding steps until we get to it's really done. Vatotse haaretz deshe esev mazria zera leminehu ve'etz oseh pri asher zarovo leminehu vayar Elohim kitov. And then we have our bounding step statement. In the Y story, again, there's not going to be such easy delineation of the steps, but we'll be looking at that as well, where 3 is, where 4 is. But the verse 10, Va'na'ar yotzei me'eden lahashkot et hagan, umisham yifared, v'haya le'arba'a rashim, shem ha'echad pishon. And then it tells us about this pishon, v'shem hana'ar hasheni gichon. And then it's going to tell us about this river. V'shem hanahar hashlishi hidekel, and it's going to tell us about that. The hanahar haravi'i hu frat, and it doesn't tell us a thing about it. Then verse 15, Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam vayanchehu began Eden la'ovda u'lishomra vayitzav Adonai Elohim al ha'adam lemor mikol eitz hagan ochel tochel achol tochel ume'etz hada'at tov v'ra lo tochal mimenu ki beyom acholcha mimenu mot tamut. And that's going to be the end of that statement. Again, we'll be looking at it more in the English when we analyze it, but that's your reading practice for next time.